This recipe is for puff pastry. So to make my puff pastry, I've got 250 grams of strong plain flour in a bowl, 250 grams of fat butter or margarine on my plate, and I've divided that up into 200 grams and a 50 gram portion, and I have a small jug of cold water. I've also got out a grater, rolling pin knife, measuring spoons and my flour sifter. And to start off with, I am just going to rub in 50 grams of fat into the strong plain flour. And the reason that you put some of your fat into the flour is so that you get a slightly short texture to your pastry, as well as getting the layers in. And when you are rubbing in, remember, you need to use thumbs over fingertips only. Lift the mixture up a little bit, and you can turn the bowl from the inside with your hands to make sure that you have rubbed the fat into the flour correctly. Right, I've finished rubbing my fat into the flour and I've washed my hands. When you've finished, if you shake your bowl, or when you think you've finished, shake your bowl and any large lumps will come to the surface. So I'm just going to put that to one side for a moment while I deal with the rest of the fat. And the rest of this butter or margarine needs to be grated on the largest size holes on your grater onto a plate, and you need to do it as quickly as you can so that it doesn't all stick together. It is going to melt a little bit in your hand, so the quicker you can do this, the better it is. When your butter is grated on the plate, you need to roughly divide it into 4 pieces. It doesn't have to be perfectly accurate, but 4 roughly even sized pieces. And now I'm going to go back and finish off the dough. So I'm going to add cold water to this. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I'm starting off with 8 tablespoons. And I'm just going to start by stirring this up and see if it forms a dough. For flaky pastry or puff pastry, any of the layered pastries, it's always better to have the dough a little bit too wet than too dry. If it's too dry, it won't form your layers for you. You won't be able to develop the gluten. If it's wet, you will get your gluten. It'll just be a little bit stickier to work with. And I can feel that 8 tablespoons in this particular flour is not enough. So I'm going to add some more, and I'm going to add another 2. So I have 10 tablespoons of water in this bowl at the moment, which is the equivalent of 150 mils of cold water. So I'm just going to put my hand in now, and that feels better. So this just gets squeezed together into a dough. There is no point in just patting it over in the bowl and then saying the dough doesn't pick everything up. You actually need to squeeze it so that you can see that all of the mixture is even in colour and texture. And if you get this right, you should end up with a clean bowl, or a relatively clean bowl. There should be nothing left in your bowl, and you should have a nice dough in your hands. So there we go, bowl's relatively clean, so that can go out of the way because I won't need that again. And I have a nice soft dough, which I am just going to knead a little bit just to make sure that it is even in texture before I start. And kneading, take the mixture furthest away from you, fold in half, push away. And you keep doing that. And although this dough is nice and soft, I'm not putting any flour on the worktop yet because I don't want to alter the consistency of the dough. Right, I've just kneaded the dough for a little while. I haven't got it perfectly smooth, but it's nice and soft and I can feel it's even in texture. And now I need to add the rest of the butter to it. So flour your worktop, and you need to roll this dough out. And I'm going to put a little bit of flour on the top, and just to start with I'm just going to flatten it a bit and shape it into a rectangle, which is what I need the dough to be when it's rolled. So this first rolling I can do as normal, just rolling away from me, and you can see already that as I'm rolling the dough out it shrinks back, so the gluten is starting to develop to help give the layers. I'm just going to pull the corners of the dough out, and it's quite stretchy, it's quite easy to do that because I want to keep it as a rectangle, and the more rectangular it is to start with, the easier and less messy it will be when I add my layers of fat in a minute. So just keep rolling it out, and it needs to be roughly the size of your rolling pins at school. Mine is a little bit longer, this one I'm using at home, but this size is fine. Okay, so it's about the width of my hand that way, and it's about 2 hands long, if that makes it easier for you to remember. Next thing you need to do, just divide this mixture into 3, and again, doesn't have to be perfect, just use the back of the knife and mark the dough. Then you take one portion of your fat and you place it all over the middle third of your dough, trying not to spread it and trying to keep the small bits of fat even. This butter that I'm using is really soft at the moment, so it's not separating into grains, but it won't matter. Take the bottom third up, use the flat of your hand and seal the edge of your pastry. Then bring the top third down, and I'm just going to pull these corners so that it is a rectangle. Press down with your hands and across there. I'm just going to give this a quarter turn now and put some more flour down and a little bit of flour on the top. And what you should have here now is pastry, fat, pastry, air and pastry. So seal again with your rolling pin all the edges, and the reason that you do that, I don't know if you can see it on the video, but there is actually air in there that's moving, and we don't want to lose that air because that will help form the layers. So this time, instead of rolling as normal, which would mean I would push all the butter and the air out the end of the pastry, I'm going to put my rolling pin on the top and just rock a little bit. And I don't know if you noticed, but I've got a huge air bubble there, which was moving up and down the pastry, and I really want to try not to break that as I am rolling this pastry. I need it to be a little bit fatter, and I'm just going to put a bit of flour on my hand and smear over the top, but I just want this to be a little bit wider because I'm trying to get the pastry to roughly the size it was before I added the fat. So it doesn't have to be perfect, and you can see I've got quite a few air bubbles in the middle which are huge. I'm just going to have to go in the middle of that one. So when I've got it again roughly the same size, I am just going to mark this into 3 again, and this time I'm just going to fold the pastry and seal it in exactly the same way I did before, but without adding any extra fat. Now, what gives you the layers in this, as I've already mentioned, is the gluten. And if I keep rolling the gluten too quickly or rolling the pastry too quickly, I'm going to stretch the gluten and it might stress and break. So if you have time after that second rolling where you didn't add any fat, it's a good idea to just leave your pastry for 5 minutes to rest before you roll and add any more fat. So I'm just going to leave this, I'm just going to put a little bit more flour under my worktop to stop it from sticking, and a little tiny bit on the top, and I'm going to leave that for 5 minutes while I do the washing up that I've collected. Okay, the pastry's had 5 minutes to rest, so I'm going to repeat what I've already done. I am going to just roll this out carefully, and again you can see I've managed to get air bubbles in between the layers, which will help give me flaky layers when the pastry is cooked. It's quite a soft dough, so you don't want to be too vicious, too brutal with it, but you do need it to go again to roughly the same length, trying not to knock out the air bubbles if you can. So again, it's a little bit short this time, so just do it a little bit longer. There we go. And it's the same thing. I'm going to mark it into 3. I'm going to take the next quarter of my fat, put that over the middle third, just spread it out a bit, and your pastry will, your fat will get a bit softer as it sits out in the room, and fold and seal. So I've folded and sealed. I'm just brushing off a little bit of extra flour on there because I don't want to put more flour into the dough. Fold and seal. Seal again with the rolling pin, give it a quarter turn, and roll this again. So you need to do this 4 times so that you have used up all of your butter. And as I've said, if you've got time to give it to rest and relax in between, that's brilliant. But sometimes I know in an hour's lesson or a 2-hour lesson, you don't always have the time to do the resting. It is much better if you can. But if you don't have time to do the resting, you just have to get your pastry rolled and made into whatever dish you are doing. And you can see these layers of pastry are getting much thinner, and I've burst a few of the bubbles this time, but I'm not that bothered because I still will have layers and I can still see air bubbles in the pastry. So again, just like I did before, I'm going to mark it into 3, bottom third up to the middle, top third down, seal the edges, and because I'm doing this demonstration at home and I've got time, I'm going to give that 5 more minutes before I add any more fat. But you keep going with your rolling and folding until all of your butter has been added to this pastry. Having got all my portions of fat into this dough, I'm just going to roll it one last time without adding any extra fat. It had a last 5 minutes rest after the last quarter of the butter was added, but I'm just going to give it one more rolling without adding any fat to it fold it up, same as before, seal your edges, and then I am going to put that on a plate in the fridge while I prepare the fillings until the fillings are ready.